Today I want to briefly cover how to use the technical indicator functions in MQL5. I have produced a video earlier talking about the iCustom technical indicator. That is a standard technical indicator in itself, but from some of the comments and responses I've received, I can see that people are still a little confused at times in how to apply some of the other technical indicators. They all follow a standard pattern, so in this video I'm going to show some examples of different uses of technical indicators. These are the technical indicators I'm talking about. If you open the MQL5 help file and go to the Contents tab, expand the MQL5 reference, you'll find technical indicators here. They all have a common use pattern, so let's go to the code and show some examples of how to use these. This is just an expert advisor that I created using the wizard just to have a place to show these functions. The first thing to do to use a function, and I'm going to just start with the moving average function because that's very common, I need a handle, and I'll create this handle as a global variable inside the application because I'm going to use it in several places. The handle is an integer and it's actually a pointer to a cache. MetaTrader 5 keeps the technical indicators in a cache so that if the same indicator is used more than once with the same settings, then it doesn't need to create multiple copies. It's for efficiency purposes. So I'm going to create, or I have created, my handle here as a global variable inside this application. The next thing to do inside the initialization function, whether it's in the expert advisor or in a custom indicator, is to create an instance of the technical indicator attached to this handle. So this is creating a handle to the moving average indicator using the IMA function. All technical indicators begin with the same two arguments, the symbol and the time frame. The remaining arguments are dependent on the technical indicator being used. So this is the moving average indicator. The first argument here is number of periods. Next is the shift value, then the method of moving average calculation. I'm just using an SMA here, and the applied price. Each indicator is going to have its own set of those values, but the pattern is always the same. Symbol, then time frame, and then arguments for the indicator. So the next thing we need to do, given that we've created this handle to a technical indicator in the cache, is identify to MetaTrader when we no longer need that handle. Typically that will be in the dinit section. All we do is call the indicator release function, passing in that handle. That will reduce the counter to that technical indicator in the MetaTrader cache by 1, and when the counter reaches 0, then MetaTrader will be able to release that technical indicator. If you're only running one expert advisor or one custom indicator, then you only have one counter of 1 to that technical indicator. But if you're running this expert advisor multiple times, or different expert advisors that are all using the same settings for the same technical indicator, then that counter will increment, and eventually when it reaches 0, MetaTrader will release the memory and the resources used by this technical indicator. Now, the reason for creating the handle to the technical indicator here in the init section and removing it in the dinit section, firstly, I'll only need to create this handle once, and I can then reuse it throughout the code. So it's more efficient to only have this creation happening once rather than create the indicator and remove it every time I want to use that. But also, when these indicators are created, they are populated in the background with data. So if I tried to create the IMA handle and then use the data from that immediately, I would find that it probably hasn't been populated, and that would cause delays or errors in the code. So by creating it here in the init section, I'm able to give this time to be created and populated with data and ready for use when I go through the loop. And even then, if it's not ready in the first run through the loop, I can cycle back, and eventually this will be filled with data and ready to use. The next step after creating the indicator is to use it. Now, I created this template using the wizard and I've checked all the boxes. So you find that after the onInit section and the onDinit, then there are a series of functions that happen on a cyclic basis on various events Typically though, in an expert advisor, you'll be using the on-tick event. You may use on-timer, and in a custom indicator, you'd be using the calculate event. So these are the events that happen regularly, and this is where you'll be using the handle to the custom indicator, or the handle. So these are the events that happen on a cycle, and this is where you'll be using the handle to the technical indicator. So let's just use the handle to the moving average technical indicator that we've already created. Now this may not be the way that you would write this in a real expert advisor. I'm creating a buffer here inside the on-tick event. You might want to create that buffer as a global variable. Then I have an integer variable called count, or CNT. Then the number of elements that I require from the IMA function. Now remember, IMA is a series of values, one for each bar or candle on the chart, so I only need 10. This may be part of some algorithm that you have that you know how many you need. It's recommended not to retrieve more values from the technical indicators than you require, because that just takes up memory and time. So to keep it efficient, keep this to the number that you need. And then this is where I retrieve the values. The copy buffer function returns a count of the number of elements that have been retrieved from the technical indicator, which I'm putting into my CNT variable. First argument is the handle, then the value number from the technical indicator. Moving average has only one value, so that's value number 0. Next is the starting position. I'm starting this at bar number 0, and then the number of elements that I want to retrieve from the technical indicator, and finally the array of double values where I want to store the results. So that's my MA buffer. So after I've done that, just in case the IMA function hasn't finished populating and doesn't have as many values as I need, I'm checking to see if count is less than the number that I requested. Then I'll simply return, and that way it will cycle through. You may have some other activities that you want to perform here, but I'm just going to return and let this cycle through. And that's all there is to retrieving the data from a simple technical indicator like IMA, which has only a single value. And let's look at some other examples where you might want to use two different technical indicators or use multiple values from a single technical indicator. I've modified this code now to use the MACD technical indicator, and this is a case where I'm going to retrieve more than one value from a single technical indicator. So firstly, I've just changed the name of the handle so that we can see that this is used for the MACD. I've set up 3 variables which are the standard arguments to a MACD function: fast period, slow period, and the signal period. Then I'm assigning from the iMACD function, again, the same 2 arguments, symbol and time frame to begin, and then the custom arguments for the MACD: fast period, slow period, signal period, and I'm applying the close price. I still have to release the handle when I'm finished. Then I'm creating 2 buffers because I'm trying to get 2 different values from the MACD. I've created a MACD buffer and a signal buffer. The MACD number is number 0. This is the value number 0 that's going to be returned by the technical indicator, and the signal number is number 1. Then I still have my CNT variable, the number required, and the start. Now here I've changed the number required to 2. I only want to get 2 values, as I said before. Get as few values as you need. And I don't need the current bar, which is bar number 0. So I'm going to start at number 1. So this keeps the call to the copy buffer as small as possible. This is the first call to copy buffer. I'm using the MACD handle. I'm using the MACD number, so this is getting value number 0 from the MACD indicator. I'm starting at the start position, number 1. I'm getting the required number of elements, 2, and I'm putting those into the MACD buffer. I'm testing the CNT that I've at least received as many as required. And then this is the second call. Copy buffer using the same handle, but using a different number. I'm using the signal number here, beginning at start and for the required number of elements, and storing those in the signal buffer. And again, the test for CNT being at least the number required. a key thing to remember here, when I'm retrieving these two values, the oldest bar will be in element number 0 of this buffer. That applies to both buffers. So by retrieving two values beginning at number 1, I'm actually retrieving bars number 2 and 1. So if you look at a chart, typically you'll count backwards. Let me bring up a chart here and point at this. So this is a chart showing a MACD. On my chart, this, where I've got the crosshairs, this is bar number 0, number 1, and number 2. But by retrieving two values beginning at 1, I'm beginning here at bar number 1, retrieving two values. So I'm retrieving these two values, and when they return in the buffer, so I'm retrieving actually the MACD values here, bar 1 and 2. But when I retrieve them into the buffer, this will be element number 0, and this will be element number 1. If I'd retrieved more values, then element number 0 would always be the bar to the far left, counting forward for as many values as I retrieved. This is the example then where I have retrieved two values from the same technical indicator, and this is just an example how I might use it. So I'm saying if the MACD buffer 1 is less than the signal buffer 1, now remember this is the right hand of the 2, and not MACD buffer 0 is less than signal buffer 0, which is the left hand of the two values. What I'm saying here is that the MACD buffer has gone under the signal buffer in bar number 1, and it was not below the signal buffer in bar number 2, and that might be a sell signal. So this is a fairly standard crossover check. Now let's look at another example. I've modified this again because I'm looking at now a standard moving average cross type test. And here, because one of the values passed into the moving average function is different, I have to have two different handles. As soon as any of these values changes, it becomes a different indicator. So I've defined two handles, the fast and the slow handle. I have a fast period and a slow period, and then I'm assigning the IMA function using the fast period to the fast handle and using the slow period to the slow handle. If these values have been input from somewhere and you're not sure if they might be the same or different, it doesn't hurt to create two handles. As I said earlier, MetaTrader will simply create a counter against the technical indicator if it has the same values. So if this fast period had the same value as the slow period, all the rest of the arguments are the same. By calling this twice, creating two handles, MetaTrader is simply creating the technical indicator once, giving me two handles to it, and incrementing the number. Then because I've created two handles, I need to release both handles. And then in this section, I have a fast moving average buffer and a slow moving average buffer. There is only one buffer number with moving average. We covered that earlier. So then I'm calling the copy buffer function twice, once against the fast moving average handle and once for the slow moving average handle. Again, passing in my start and required values, filling in the fast buffer and the slow buffer. And then this would be a standard moving average cross test. I'm saying if the fast buffer has moved below the slow buffer, and in the previous bar, if it was not below the slow buffer, then this might be a sell signal. Something I forgot, and it's very important. After creating the handles to these indicators, you should test that you've received a valid handle. The same as opening up a handle to a file. So I've added in these statements. If my fast handle is the invalid handle, then I'll just return init failed. I'll do that for the slow handle as well. And then just to be clean, when I'm in the dinit function, I'm testing to see if the fast handle is not invalid before I release it, and the same for the slow handle. And here's the third example where I'm adding confluence. So I'm going to also look at the RSI. I've created a handle for the RSI value, and I've added in this trigger Boolean value. We'll see that in a moment. Settings are the same. I've added an RSI period here of 5. I'm creating the handles. Handles to the moving averages are the same we had before, but now I've got a handle to the RSI function. It only takes a period and an applied price. And I'm checking the handle now to make sure that I've got a valid handle for the RSI. In the dinit section, again, release the RSI handle. Now I've added an RSI buffer. There is still only a single value coming back from the RSI function, so I'm still just using buffer number 0. And I haven't changed the count, the required, or the start. All I've added in here is a copy buffer, so I'm getting the RSI handle and putting the values into the RSI buffer. Then what I'm saying is that if RSI buffer 1, the bar that's just closed, has closed below 70, and RSI buffer 0, the buffer before that, was not below 70, using the not sign, then I'm just setting the trigger to true. So as soon as the RSI crosses out of the overbought zone, then I've set the trigger to, and I'm ready to trade. Then I've simply made a change here. If the trigger is set, then I'm checking the moving average cross, the same test that I had earlier. And once that moving average cross happens, then I'll set my trigger to false, and then I can go on and do the sell trade. Now, obviously, if this is a real example, you'd set the trigger to know whether you're crossing up from the oversold or down from the overbought. I'm just showing how to use the functions here. And so that's using Confluence and adding multiple technical indicators. Now the last example I want to show, and I won't go into a lot of detail on this, is an alternative to the applied price value that we've been using. So I've created another handle, which I'm calling the handle RSI average. I'm going to calculate the moving average of the RSI. So to do this, I've already got the handle to RSI, which I've tested to see that it's not an invalid handle. And then I'm creating an IMA technical indicator, still using symbol and period, passing in the fast period value, and I'm using the simple moving average mode, but instead of sending in an applied price, I'm passing in the handle to the RSI that I created earlier. And when this runs, it will apply the moving average calculation to the RSI values from this RSI handle. To get an idea of what that might be like, if we go back to the chart. So this chart has an RSI here already. If I drag the moving average onto that second window, one of the options here in the apply to is the previous indicators data. If I do that, then you can see I now have a moving average of the RSI in this chart. So that's a technique where you can apply one indicator on top of another indicator, and you can cascade this as many times as you like. So that's the quick summary on using technical indicators in MetaTrader 5. I've only covered using the standard technical indicator functions. I haven't covered using the indicator create. I'll do that in a different video. All the technical indicators are documented in the MQL5 reference under technical indicators. Some indicators can return more than one value if the indicator does. And if we look at, say, the Ichimoku here, you'll find that in the help documentation, they always have the buffer numbers listed where you can get the values for those multiple values that come back. To use a technical indicator, begin by setting up handles. These are just integers, and I create them as global values so that I can use them in multiple parts of the application. Setting up the technical indicators is just using the technical indicator function. The first two arguments are always the symbol and the time frame, followed by the values specific to that technical indicator, and assign them to the handle. Check the handle after calling the technical indicator creation. Make sure it's not an invalid handle. If you wish, you can pass in a handle to another technical indicator rather than using a standard applied price, and that allows you to create compounded technical indicator values. Always release the handles when you're finished with them, because this allows MetaTrader 5 to decrement the count and eventually remove that technical indicator from its memory when it's no longer used. To retrieve values from technical indicators, use the copy buffer function And the arguments to that are the handle to the indicator, the number of the value from that indicator. So where we saw the Ichimoku, it had 5 different values. This is the buffer number. The starting point, counting from the right, the number of values that you want to retrieve, and then the buffer where those values will be stored. Check the count returned from the copy buffer function to make sure that you've retrieved as many values as you required. And when you're using the values that have come back in these buffers, the oldest candle or oldest bar will be in element number 0 of that buffer. And that's the summary on using standard technical indicators in MetaTrader 5. As I said, I will cover the indicator create, which is a different method of setting up these handles, in another video, and I'll also use a separate video to cover this for MetaTrader 4. Until then, if you have any comments or questions, please leave them. Please leave a like, that helps us a lot. And if you want to see more of these videos, click the subscribe button and click the bell icon to get a notification when we release more videos. Thank you for watching.